Today, we're looking at Robert Oster's Torquay. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Robert Oster's Torquay is a turquoise ink. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a cross Bailey with a medium nib to take my notes for this video. Now, before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is this very minty green. At the bottom, it's really light, but it is a minty green that's there, and then this bright, little darker than highlighter blue at the top. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes, and let's be honest, if that D was not on that piece of filter paper, I would not be able to tell the difference between these two. It really makes me say that there's going to be no hold on for this ink. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pens. Now, I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, I am just shocked that it 3 days later just wiped out the word high. It's gone, so don't use it as a note taker. You can't even evaluate what was there because it just looks like an ugly color of highlighter was put down. With that said, looking at what happens with water, it's completely obliterating it and taking it entirely off the page. This is a super gentle ink in how easy it is to clean out. That could make this, maybe, I don't know, maybe this would be a good ink in some of your pens that might be vintage. But water is all that it's going to take to clean this from your pen. Now, pen flush. Of course, considering how water did, pen flush also obliterates it. There's no need for the pen flush. The 1/3 bleach solution obliterates it. There's no need for a 1/3 bleach solution. This ink is removal ready. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Robert Oster's Torquay has a viscosity of 3.95. making this a very dry ink. To find my average dry times, I used my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Robert Oster's Torquay has an average dry time of 10 seconds, making this a fast drying ink. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Now, the camera likes to have a little bit of trouble with this particular tone. I'm going to try and fix it in post, but if I can't, you're warned. Let's take a look at the Clairefontaine. We get no bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and no shading, which to me is very weird with, turquoise and aquamarine type inks. The extra fine is the same tone as the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and it has plenty of shading. Unlike the 1.1, the extra fine gives plenty of shading. When I look at it, the E in the is much darker than the word. The K in quick is much darker. B in brown is much darker. X in fox. It seems like there's always one letter darker than the rest of the word, with the exception of the word over. Go figure. 4 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine and the 1.1. The medium has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and beautiful shading. Again, whole letters per word seem to be shading, like the K in quick, the R in brown, the X in fox. In jumps, it's backwards. Only the J is light, the rest of it is nice and dark.
The is a very dark word compared to lazy that's significantly lighter than it. So it's beautiful shading throughout all this writing. 7 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both shows plenty of color variation, and we get a ton of color variation. And the smear test, I believe you could recover if you smeared while you were writing. Turquoise River. No bleeding, very little ghosting, but it is a light ink. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shading. But Turquoise River does tend to kill the shade on most inks. The extra fine is the same tone as that 1.1. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade, 6 seconds to dry. Now the medium is the same tone as the extra fine in the 1.1. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, but we see spots of shading, which is very unusual on this paper. Like the top of the H in the is lighter, quite a bit lighter than the rest of the word. The K in quick is much darker than the rest of that word. L in lazy is much lighter than the rest of the word lazy. The J in jumps is lighter than the U, which is darker than the MPS. So there is some shading that's coming through, and it's really neat, and you don't get that very much on Turquoise River. 11 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby of the extra fine shows no color variation, and we got none. The scrubby of the medium shows some, and we got some. And the smear test, strangely, because it's such a light ink, you could recover this if you smeared while you were writing. Rhodia. No bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shading. I think it's that squeegee action of what a stub does that's wiping the shading out that this ink fully can do. The extra fine is the same tone as the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and only some spots that are darker. The D in dry is a bit darker. The P in jumps is a bit darker. The Z in lazy is a bit darker. The K in quick and the B in brown. These are our darker letters throughout the writing. The rest of it is pretty much one tone. It took 3 seconds to dry. The medium is the same tone as the extra fine and the 1.1. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and the shading is much better than we saw with the extra fine. The shading is very nice. The E in the is much darker than the rest of the word. The bottom of the Q is darker than the rest of the Q, and the K is darker than the rest of the word. The O in brown is darker than the word. The X in fox. The U in jumps is a very light letter compared to the letters next to it. Very nice shading. 7 seconds to dry. Even the 7 goes from very light to a very dark to a mid-tone to a very dark at the bottom. Very nice stuff. Now the extra fine and the medium scrubby both show us some color variation. Although we didn't get as much, not really with the extra fine. It came out quite a bit nicer with the medium, and the medium showed more. The smear tests for both show us that we could recover if you smeared while you were writing. Field notes. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade. Now the extra fine is the same tone as the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade. 3 seconds to dry. The medium is the same tone as the extra fine in the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade. Still 3 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both shows plenty of color variation, but I saw none in the writing sample, and the smear test you could recover it if you smeared while you were writing. North Books. North Books has no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is the same tone as the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. 2 seconds to dry. The medium is the same tone as the extra fine and the 1.1. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shading. 2 seconds to dry still. The scrubby for the extra fine shows no color variation. The scrubby for the medium shows some, but we got none in either of them. And the smear test, you could still recover this. It's amazing because it's such a light ink that you could still recover it on so many of these. Just amazing. Leuchtturm, 1917. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is the same tone as the 1.1. It has no feather spread, halo sheen or shade, 4 seconds to dry. Now the medium got weird. The medium has no feathering, but it has spread. It's certainly wider. Looking for Fox. It looks wider in its lines, looking at the downstrokes there. Looking at the word brown to the word brown, it looks just a little bit wider. So I think there's a little bit of spread here, not tremendous, little bits of spread. No halo, no sheen, there's spots of shading. Like the K in quick is a bit darker. The in lazy, L is lighter than the rest of the word. The X in fox is darker. The PS in jumps is quite a bit darker. So there is some shading that goes on in the medium. It took 9 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine and the medium showed plenty of color variation. We got none in the extra fine, but we do get some in the medium. And the smear test, still, you could recover this if you smeared while you were writing. And that is all that I have for the writing sample.
Instead of finding inks that look like Robert Oster's Torquay, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I've chosen Private Reserve's Claret because that is one of my favorite colors of red. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Robert Oster's Torquay? I think it shades very nicely. I think the tone is beautiful. Beware that in finer, drier pens, it is a bit too light to use on a full page of writing. It just becomes hard to read. However, in broader, wetter pens, absolutely an amazing color and worth giving a shot to. Thanks for watching.